Now we've declared that, we can create the LLM class. Generally, when I write my code and applications like this, I like to wrap my code in classes. Not only is it best practice, but it's also really good for reusability and for debugging. Especially as you start to write more production level code, object-oriented programming is really important. I imported this chunk of code for the LLM manager. As you can see, within the properties, I'm defining a few variables here. This first one is the intents. These are all the different intents that this AI voice agent can handle. So it's going to allow me to add an item, remove an item, update the quantity, clear the basket, exit the conversation to identify if the query is invalid, check out, reset my basket, and start the ordering process. Now you can change these intents to whatever you want, but the reason why these are important is because when I set up the LLM, I'll instruct the LLM that these are the only things that this LLM needs to be able to handle. Anything else outside of these will fall into the invalid query intent. And this way, it will then constrain the LLM from going off and trying to fulfill a completely different type of query. This keeps the LLM within a certain boundary. I've then defined some products that I'm going to ask for. In this case, I've got some video games, Pokemon merch, technology, and consoles. I've also included synonyms for all of these items. This is optional. You can use the LLM to think about these synonyms themselves, but I find that giving the LLM some further instruction and some further indication as to the different ways that people can ask for things, especially as you start to work with much more nuanced conversations, this is also quite useful as well. And then we're literally just initializing the class. This is literally just opening up, instantiating the OpenAI class and creating some global variables. The next method is the process user input method. This is where we're actually going to call the LLM and instruct it with our prompt. So I've constructed this prompt, and this format for prompts works really well. Giving it clear instructions and clear sections to your prompt definitely can help. In terms of the context, it's a shopping assistant chatbot. The user will give commands to add, remove, or update items in their basket. And it's your role to keep track of the basket. Making it clear in terms of steps that the AI has to follow is also a really good best practice. For example, as your role, you must process the user's query and you update the basket based on that query. These are the different intents that you need to handle, which we've already detailed. Then giving it steps, logical steps it has to go through when we're asking it to do something. So for this example, it includes processing the user's query, updating the current basket based on the query, and then returning the results in the specified valid JSON. And then finally, any rules that the LLM should follow are really important to define as well. In this example, I'm telling it to output the response in a valid JSON format. You need to handle irrelevant queries gracefully. I'm instructing it that it needs to use the data that I've provided in the products and the synonyms to match my query to products. And if the product that I'm asking for is not relevant, then ignore it, essentially. If you're familiar with using LLM APIs, then this code should look fairly familiar. Simply creating some messages that we're going to be sending to the chat completions API, defining the model. In this case, I'm just using a very lightweight and cheap model, ChatGPT 4o Mini. You can obviously swap this out for whichever you want. Now, the temperature is quite important because the temperature generally decides how creative or outside of the box your LLM will be thinking. In this case, I don't need the LLM to think particularly creatively. I literally just need it to analyze what I'm saying. So I don't want it to be thinking outside of the box. Therefore, I'm setting it to 0, which should make it much more reserved. And then this final block of code here is essentially just passing the result from the LLM. So that is everything that we need for the AI LLM Manager class. Now we're going to switch over to the conversation file.